Hello and welcome to another TLDR News UK video. In this one we're going to discuss a new report by Adrian Zenz in the Jamestown Foundation about Tibetan labour camps, quite similar to those that exist for Uighur Muslims in Xinjiang. If you want to know more about the Uighur situation in Xinjiang, we put out a video on exactly this a few months ago. There's a link in the description. Before we start this video though, a quick shout out to everyone who's backing us on Patreon. These backers help us to make more content across the TLDR network and support the work we're doing. In return, they get bonus perks like exclusive live events, behind the scenes posts, early access to videos, merch discounts, exclusive merch items, and their names mentioned in videos. Find out what you can get over on our Patreon page. It's linked below. Okay, so before we get into the report, it's worth explaining some of the history behind the relationship between Tibet and China. If you want to skip this context bit, then move ahead to the time on screen. Throughout its history, Tibet has gone through periods of autonomy and then occupation from China. In 1720, the Qing dynasty claimed Tibet as part of China, and this lasted until the beginning of the 1900s, when the British invaded Tibet. China reclaimed the border town of Chamdo in the east of Tibet in 1950, in the Battle of Chamdo. After the Battle of Chamdo, China negotiated the 17-point agreement with Tibet, which basically gave them control over the region. We say negotiated in inverted commas because there was little input from Tibet. According to the Dalai Lama, when Tibetan negotiators arrived in Beijing, they were presented with the already finished 17-point agreement. They weren't allowed to communicate with their own government, and no negotiation was offered by the Chinese delegation. Like a lot of China's territorial claims, its claim rests on a historical argument, because at certain points in its history, Tibet has been under Chinese rule, and they claim this makes it their sovereign territory. Anyway, the Battle of Chamdo had shown that China was willing to exert its military strength, so the Tibetan negotiators signed the 17-point agreement. This is why, ever since the agreement was signed, the exiled Tibetan government, under the leadership of the Dalai Lama, has claimed that the agreement shouldn't stand, as it was signed under the threat of further Chinese military action. For several years after the 17-point agreement was signed, the Tibetan government enjoyed a large degree of autonomy from the Chinese central government, apart from in Chamdo, which was de facto occupied by the Chinese People's Liberation Army. This period of relative peace lasted until 1956, when the Tibetan militias attacked the PLA in Tibet after China started experimenting with land reform in the region, which basically involved killing landowners and redistributing the land to peasants. Tensions boiled over, and in 1959 the Dalai Lama fled to India and renounced the 17-point agreement. The PRC took complete control over Tibet, and, since then, Tibet has been an autonomous region of China. Anyway, Tibet has existed in this state of political ease since, where it's technically an autonomous region of China, but without a Dalai Lama. So, on to the new report. The report came on September the 22nd, so we're sorry for being a bit slow to the party on this one, but it's been a busy week. It was produced by Adrian Zenz at the Jamestown Foundation, the same academic that uncovered the mass sterilisation programme in Xinjiang earlier this year, and corroborated by Reuters. The headline finding from this report was that the Chinese government is retraining farmers in Tibet, described as rural surplus labourers in official documents, in military-style camps across Tibet. This retraining has been going on since 2005 in some form or another, but it's been seriously ramped up recently. To give a bit of history, as early as 2005, Tibet had a small-scale rural surplus labour training and employment initiative for pastoralists and farmers in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. Basically, the government would retrain rural labourers for factory work and then send them off to a factory that needed them. In 2006, the 11th five-year plan for the autonomous region of Tibet then specified that this type of training and labour transfer was to be conducted throughout Tibet. From 2012, the Chamdo region initiated a military-style training for surplus force transfer for pastoral and agricultural regions. Chamdo's scheme was formally established in 2016 with the 13th five-year plan, with the goal of training 65,000 labourers. In 2016, Shannon, in South Tibet, also implemented vocational training with, quote, semi-military style management. Finally, in March 2019, the Chinese government published the Farmer and Pastoralist Training and Labour Transfer Action Plan for Tibet, which mandated the vigorous promotion of military-style vocational training throughout all of Tibet. And this is where it seems the programme really kicked off. In 2020, the Chinese central government introduced quotas for Tibet. They wanted 55,000 trained surplus labourers to be employed inside Tibet and 5,000 outside Tibet, so 60,000 in total. According to a Chinese government document, in the first 7 months of 2020, 543,000 rural surplus labourers were retrained, which apparently comes to 90.5% of its annual goal, which would come to about 15% of the entire population of Tibet. The programme has some glaring similarities to Xinjiang. Both programmes are aimed at rural surplus labourers, both employ military-style management, both teach Mandarin and official Chinese law, both discourage against religion. Official Chinese documents talk about diluting the negative influences of religion in Tibet, and both are overseen by Chen Quango. Chen Quango is the Chinese official who was appointed by the CCP party secretary for Xinjiang in 2016, overseeing the mass expansion of forced labour camps for the local Uighur population. From 2011 to 2016, Chen was CCP party secretary for Tibet. However, there are two important differences between Xinjiang and Tibet. In Xinjiang, Uighur men are forcibly detained in these camps for trivial offences, like communicating with relatives in foreign countries, and women are apparently detained if they don't agree to intrauterine contraception. The coercion in Tibet is less physical. Chinese officials expect households to report on each other and go from door to door to, quote, help transform the thinking and views of poor households. But this is more psychological propaganda rather than the direct physical coercion. The second important difference is that this programme is apparently less about suppressing separatism and more about alleviating poverty. In Xinjiang, the CCP justifies its forced labour camps by pointing to the drop in separatist terrorist attacks. In Tibet, the CCP justifies its programme by pointing to lower levels of poverty. One of Xi Jinping's big policy ambitions is the eradication of poverty in China. Poverty, though, is measured by disposable cash income, so if you're a self-sufficient rural surplus labourer, you're technically in poverty, even if you're living a higher quality of life than some factory workers, who have cash income and is therefore technically out of poverty. In 2019, the CCP set a target of completely eradicating poverty in Tibet by 2021. In practice, this means retraining rural surplus labourers into factory workers and such, so that they have some sort of monetary income. And this deadline might explain why there's apparently been such a massive uptick in retraining numbers. So, that's the long and short of it. China seems to have massively increased its Tibetan retraining programme, with 543,000 Tibetans being retrained in the first 7 months of 2020. While it's apparently voluntary, this is a suspiciously large number, and a suspiciously large rate of increase. However, we think there's a chance that this 543,000 is a typo, and the real number is in fact a tenth of this, 54,300. This number would make a lot more sense, and it'd be an easy typo to make, because it's written as 54.3. The difference between 5.43 and 54.3 is just a misplaced full stop. This document also says it's 90.5% of the total target, which would make the total target 600,000. 54,300 would make a lot more sense here, because then the total target would be 60,000, which is the total target given in a Tibet Autonomous Region Human Resources and Social Security Department report for 2020. 5,000 in other provinces outside of Tibet, and 55,000 within Tibet. Finally, that document that contains the 543,000 figure then goes on to say that of this 543,000, 49,900 have been employed in Tibet and 3,109 outside Tibet. Again, here it would make a lot more sense for the actual figure to be 54,300, because then only about 1,000 Tibetans would be unaccounted for, presumably still undergoing training or yet to be employed. The 543,000 figure implies that about 500,000 Tibetans are unaccounted for, retraining but either without jobs or still undergoing training. This seems unlikely given that the capital of Tibet, Lhasa, has a population of about 250,000. So this would mean 2 Lhasas worth of Tibetans in these retraining camps today. Now, ideally, China's Foreign Affairs Ministry would have corrected this sort of error, if it is in fact an error, but they've only denied the report as a whole, without responding to specific allegations. What these people with ulterior motives are calling forced labour simply does not exist. We hope the international community will distinguish right from wrong, respect facts and not be fooled by lies. So, not too helpful. Anyway, we've reached out to Reuters for comment and we'll keep you updated. We just thought it was worth mentioning and seeing what you guys think about it. Obviously, there's a good chance we're completely wrong here, so take our speculation with a pinch of salt. As always, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we post a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos just like this one possible. If you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.